Hey everyone, I'm Saints, a competitive Gods Unchained player, and in this video I'm going to show you a framework for successful deck building, especially if you're new to trading card games. We're going to go over the 3 basic archetypes, finding your win condition, run through an actual deck building exercise, and more. If you prefer a text version of this guide, feel free to check out the link in the description below, otherwise let's hop right in. Generally speaking, most decks fall into one of 3 archetypes: aggro, mid-range, and control. There are also combo decks, but we'll keep it simple for now. Aggro decks try to win as quickly as possible by dealing damage to the opposing god. It usually compromises having any chance to win in the late game by doubling down on its ability to win early. Control decks win by surviving into the late game, where they can play stronger spells and creatures that are difficult to deal with. Mid-range can be seen as a hybrid between the two, which tends to have its most threatening turns in the mid-game, roughly when you're around 5 to 7 mana. It either tries to outlast aggro or become the aggressor against control. In Gods Unchained, aggro has the advantage over mid-range, since aggro plays too fast for mid-range to be able to properly respond. On the other hand, mid-range power spikes before control can get comfortable. Meanwhile, control has an advantage over aggro since control can usually respond to aggression early on with enough spells and frontline creatures. Knowing the type of deck you're building is important because it forms the basis of what your win condition is. When you know your win condition, you can start evaluating which cards to add to your deck based on how well they contribute to it. A common mistake beginners make when they start opening their first legendary cards is to try and shoehorn those cards into their existing decks. You must always serve the win condition first, even if that fancy legendary looks totally overpowered. There are many types of win conditions, some of which are listed here, but an easy to play and common deck type that beginners gravitate towards is Tempo, which is usually a creature-oriented mid-range deck. The win condition is usually to build an increasingly strong board while also keeping your opponent's board empty, which naturally gives you card advantage over time. So let's take a shot at building a Tempo deck. It'll be entirely free to play, built from cards from the core set only, without legendaries, just so it'll be easy for you to follow along. We'll start with the Nature God. As you go through your cards, make a quick mental note of how well each card serves your win condition, maybe on a scale of 1 to 5 if it helps. In our case, we want strong stats and ways to keep our opponent from developing on board. And by the way, I linked an additional resource in the description below just in case you need help evaluating card strength. So let's start by going through some cards and practicing this mental exercise. Dense Fog, not too useful, probably a 1. Packstock, decent, but not for us since it wants to get played mid to late game and we're trying to establish board control earlier than that. Probably a 2 out of 5 I would say. Revivification provides God Healing, so that looks like a card for control, not tempo, so probably a 1. Marshwalker has incredible stats and effect for a 1-drop, so we'll add it, definitely a 5. Simple Satyr, more heals, looks control-oriented, we'll pass. This practice might sound boring to you, but as you become more familiar with the game and its cards, you'll start developing a sixth sense for which cards you should look to include for your particular win condition. Scrolling down even further, I noticed Trial Spirit, a 1/3 with an effect that will help us keep creatures on board, so we'll add that as well. Moving on to 2 mana cards, I'm going to add creatures that have strong stats that will likely persist on the board for more than 1 turn. They'll directly help me take board control early on, letting us build into our stronger mid-game turns. I'll also add a couple of spells and weapons like Staff of Roots, which will definitely help us secure board control. Looking into the 3-drops now, you may be tempted to play a card like Rebel Quartermaster. After all, it makes our strong creatures even stronger. But we're not entirely focused on building a wide board full of cheap creatures, but rather 1, maybe 2 creatures per turn. Rebel Quartermaster would make our future turns way better, but at the cost of being extremely substatted for a 3-drop. Instead, we'll add stronger base creatures like Dune Cavalry, and maybe his horse-riding rival, Viking Outrider. Okay, 4-drops. Lightning Strike is nice, but when do we ever need to deal 8 damage to a creature? That usually sounds like something we'd only use to respond to very late-game threats, but we're focused on maximizing the value of our 4th turn right now, so let's add a Overgrown Rhino instead. Veteran Archer has damage on Roar for removing creatures, which definitely serves our win condition. But wait, Carthaginian Marine also seems like it does something similar, plus he has 1 more attack. So which card should we add? We'll get into that towards the end of the video. Rinse and repeat this same process for the higher mana cards. Again, we're looking to build creatures with strong stats, as well as creatures that can reduce the strength of our opponent's board while we build ours, while also being aware of the fact that we're running out of card slots. For our final 8 mana slot, we'll add a Vinebound Jotun as a late game closer. Looking at our initial deck list, what can we learn? First off, for almost every card in our deck, we've included 2 copies. Generally, if a card is good enough to include in your deck, it's worth doubling up on. Now, there are exceptions to every rule, but if a card plays an important enough role, you'll want 2 copies of it to improve your chances of consistently drawing it. For instance, while we can't equip 2 weapons at the same time, we still want 2 Staff of Roots just because it increases our chances of drawing it early on, which will directly lead to a higher win rate since Staff of Roots is so good. We also see a lot of cohesion and synergy. We don't play anything that doesn't directly serve our win condition, and all cards are either really strong creatures that can often take multiple attacks, or they're a 2-for-1 with their damage on Roar. A trap beginner players make is they often overvalue their God's health and therefore overvalue cards like Portable Fortress. And while Portable Fortress has high raw stats, it doesn't help us take board control early because it doesn't trade with any enemy creatures, so it's actually non-synergistic with our deck. Lastly, we have some semblance of a mana curve. We've front-loaded 1 and 2 mana cards, but not overwhelmingly so, just enough so that we're likely to have at least a card to play on turn 1. Actually a 92.57% chance in this case. If we front-loaded a lot more 1 and 2 drops, our deck would qualify more as an aggro zoo deck, and if we backloaded more 6+ drops, we'd start getting into control territory. You're never going to perfect a deck on the first try. Decks take a lot of iteration to get just right, and even when you get it perfect, a change in the meta might warrant additional changes. Don't get too attached to any particular deck list. Always be willing to change to new balance changes, expansion sets, meta shifts, and most importantly, your own intuition. Remember, all cards you put in your deck should serve a purpose in getting you closer to your win condition. The deck we've built is a mid-range deck, but it also happens to lean towards control due to all the damage on Roar effects, which also happens to let it counter aggro a lot easier. But if you find that the meta is mostly slower control decks that aren't playing a lot of creatures, you should prefer creature buffing cards like Traveling Bard over Carthaginian Marine, which will help you play a lot more aggressively. If the meta is mostly aggro zoo, perhaps Veteran Archer gets the nod over Carthaginian Marine for the times it trades 3-for-1. If Zoo is running over your deck early on, then try adding cheaper damage on Roar cards like Athenian Archer and Dwarf Atlant, replacing more expensive cards like Ogre Archer and Frost Giant Deadshot. Constantly reevaluate even the cards that are working for you. Are there even better alternatives? If you find that you're playing Oliphant Mount on an empty board too frequently, consider replacing it with something stronger like Burnished Bull. Every card can be strong in some roles, weak in others. Continue to analyze what you're consistently seeing in your matches, and that will guide you to make more optimal card decisions. So that's it for now. I hope this video gave you a framework for deck building, especially as you dive into more complex decks. Thanks a lot for watching, and good luck.